Hey guys, this is Mr. Breen, and in this video I'll be talking about alpha contract verbs. Alpha contract verbs have a first principle part that looks like this, with an alpha coming before the omega at the end. That means that in its dictionary entry, this is going to be the first thing that you see. But this word is not an actual form that you'll ever see in Greek text. Instead, this alpha is going to contract. So I'll show you the forms now, the way they sort of finally look, and then I'll show you where they come from. So the forms are timo, timas, tima, timomen, timata, timosi for our first, second, third singular and first, second, third plural. Our infinitive is timon, and then our second singular and second plural imperative are tima and timata. So let's take a look at where those forms come from. So we have a stem, tima, and then we have our theme vowels, omicron, epsilon, epsilon, omicron, epsilon, omicron, then for the infinitive, epsilon, and for our two imperatives, epsilon and epsilon. And then we have our endings, blank, s-a, nen, te, nsi, and for the infinitive, blank for the second singular imperative, and te for the second plural imperative. So these forms will contract as follows. Alpha plus omicron will equal omega, so we get timo. Alpha plus epsilon is a little more complicated, but first we do the epsilon, and that becomes epsilon iota, and then once you add the alpha in, it becomes alpha with just an iota subscript, and the same thing happens in the third singular. In the first plural, again, alpha plus omicron will become omega, and then alpha plus epsilon just means long alpha. Alpha plus omicron here will become long omega, and the nu drops out, just like we've seen before, so instead of timaonsi, we get timosi. In the infinitive, we get something a little weird, because normally you would get epsilon equals epsilon iota, and then once you add the alpha in, you would get exactly what you get in the second and third singular up here, alpha with an iota subscript, but for whatever reason, we don't get a subscript, we just get long alpha. And then in the imperatives, alpha plus epsilon becomes long alpha. I don't have a long mark to put over it, so you just have to know that's long. And the same thing in tima eta, alpha plus epsilon just becomes long alpha. Here are some other examples of alpha contract verbs. So we have boao would normally be the first principal part, but it just becomes bo'o, bo'as, boa, bo'omen, bo'ata, bo'osi, bo'an, boa, and bo'ata. There's a little bit of a mistake here because there should be a circumflex, a long accent over this omega here. And then for horao, which means to see, we have horo, horas, hora, horomen, horata, horosi, horan, hora, and horata. Take a second to practice forming these, and what I want you to do is to take these forms of the verb nikao, which means to conquer, and I want you to turn them from singular to plural, or from plural to singular. I'll go ahead and give you a few seconds to pause, and then I'll put the answers up on the screen.